The wise Archimedes once said, "Show me one point on the universe, and I shall move the earth." Very few people probably know that this sentence is concealing a great occult mystery, namely the secret of the fourth dimension. As we all remember from our school days, everything having a shape, every body has a length, width, and height, definitions that are familiar to us. If in the middle of a form, for example, a sphere, we imagine a double crossing, on the crossing spot we get a point, the so-called depth point. Archimedes certainly had this point in mind because it is actually the point of beginning, the starting point, the nucleus of every form. Regarded from this point, every point is symmetrically objective, meaning that it is in true equilibrium. This is the base of the mystery of the fourth dimension. Hence the concept of time and space, of timelessness and spacelessness, and therefore also the secret of space magic. The scholar is advised to meditate very intensely about this problem, and he will be able to open up profundities he never dreamed of, and a high intuition will be his reward. In association with the magical mental training of Step 5, we shall speak about the space magic. With all the previous exercises, the scholar has achieved a certain capacity of concentration, and he has learned to transform his consciousness at will or to adjust it to any form, and he will be able to see farther and deeper. The instructions of the fifth step shall show us how to transplant the consciousness into the center of any form, beginning with the tiniest atom to the highest universe. In this manner, the scholar not only learns to understand and interpret every form from its center, he will also be taught to master it from the center. The facilities acquired by means of the following exercises are of very great at any time. This mental balance is the specific fundamental property of the akasa or causal principle of the mind. Therefore, let us turn immediately to the practical exercises. Take up your customary position. Now put some larger objects in front of you, perhaps a solid ball, a die, a cube, etc. It will be profitable at first to select objects with full contents. Fix your eyes for a short time on one of these objects. Then close your eyes and transfer your consciousness to the depth point, that is, to the center. The transplantation of your consciousness has to be so close that you forget your body entirely. This exercise is very difficult indeed, but practice will make perfect. Nobody should be scared away by failures in the beginning, but keep on working diligently. Man being accustomed to 3 dimensions only, some difficulties will occur at first, but they will diminish from one exercise to the next, and gradually one gets accustomed to concrete on being in the depth point of any object. If you have been successful in staying for at least 5 minutes with all of your consciousness into the center of the object you choose, you may go on to the next object. After achieving the same good results, select different objects for exercising, but this time use unsymmetrical ones. Each time, you must go so far that you transfer your consciousness in the center of any object and feel yourself as small as a poppy seed, even as an atom. If you can manage this without any disturbance, go ahead to the next exercise, seizing the dimension and shape of the object from your depth point. The smaller you feel yourself, and the more your consciousness is shrinking, all the bigger the circumference or the width of the object will appear to you. From your point of view, the selected object represents a whole universe, and you must hold on to this feeling as long as possible. Once you have managed this exercise free from disturbances with a symmetrical object as well as with an unsymmetrical one, you can turn to another object. You may believe this exercise well performed if you can book the same good success with any object whatsoever. After numerous exercises of the depth point transference, you will attain the capacity to look through any object, and you will intuitively recognize the material as well as the mental structure of such an object. At the same time, you will obtain the facility to influence every object from the nucleus, to load it magnetically at will, and thus to impregnate the mental sphere of every object with your desire. We have learned in the fourth step to master this problem through the accumulation of vital power, from outwards to inwards, and this step will teach us to do the same, but in a far more impressive manner, from inwards to outwards. A magician has to obtain the same effect with animals and human beings. He must also manage it with objects that are not directly before his eyes. Consciousness knows no bounds at all. Therefore, he can practice transference to the farthest distance. As soon as the scholar has reached this point, he can start transferring consciousness into the fourth dimension in his own body, the microcosm into the akasa principle of his own being. The practice is as follows. You are sitting quietly in your familiar position with your eyes closed. Transfer your consciousness exactly into the middle of your body, into the pit of your stomach, the solar plexus. You must feel yourself as a mere dot, as an atom in the center between the spine and the pit of your stomach. This center is the center of gravity of your body. Try to stay there with your consciousness for at least 5 minutes. You may use an alarm clock to check the time. Regard your body from his point. The more diminutive you imagine yourself, the bigger you will perceive the circumference of your body, which will appear to you as a big universe. At this point, meditate as follows. I am the center of my body. I am the determining power therein. Difficulties in the beginning should not discourage the scholar, even if he manages it only for a few seconds at first. The seconds will become minutes by constant exercise. The limit for staying in this depth point is 5 minutes. Working through this step, the scholar should be able to transfer himself at any hour and in every situation into this depth point, into the akasa principle, from there perceiving and influencing all that concerns his being. This consciousness transference into the akasa principle is the genuine magical state of trance and represents the preliminary stage of the connection with the cosmic consciousness. I shall describe the practice relating to this linking up to the cosmic consciousness in a further chapter. The magical trance should not be mixed up with the state produced by spiritualistic mediums, provided we have to do with genuine physical phenomenon and mediums of integrity. Mostly a lot of mischief is done in this line to mislead credulous people. The real spiritualistic mediums bring about their trances whether with the help of a prayer, a hymn, or some other meditation, or through a sort of passivity of the mind, conjuring up a spontaneous displacement of the consciousness. In this state, it is possible for elementals, deceased people, and certain low beings to induce the astral body, together with the material body, to manifestations and other undertakings. From the Hermetic point of view, such experiments are to be regarded as a sort of obsession, even if the beings in question should be good ones. The true magician naturally does not doubt the performance of such experiments, if they are to be taken very seriously, but he will feel very sorry indeed about these mediums. The magician himself can consciously form connections with the beings in quite a different way, being fully aware of what he is doing. Particulars will be given in a special chapter. Magic Psychic Training 5. Continued. The practical instructions of the fourth step have taught us to draw the 4 elements from the universe into our body, to accumulate these elements first in the whole body and afterwards in every single part of it, thus producing a tension of elements which we call a dynamide. The body became more elastic with respect to the tension of the elements from one exercise to the next, and more capable of resistance against the effect of pressure. This lesson will bring us farther step by step and teach us to project and manage the elements outwards. Because without the outward projection of elements, any work in practical magic is inconceivable. We have to give our keenest attention to practical work. Sit down in your usable position. Inhale through the lungs and pores, and with the help of the imagination, press the element of fire into your body. You are inhaling the fire element with a specific property of heat, and you are inhaling empty breaths. If the warmth in your body seems to be very strong, consequently, if there is a sufficient accumulation of this element, let the element escape through imagination from the solar plexus and fill the entire room you are in with the fire element. While you empty the element from your body, you should have the feeling that your body is completely delivered from it and that the accumulated element has diffused into the whole room, similar to the procedure you followed in the impregnation of the room with vital power. Repeat the accumulation and evacuation several times, and by the emptying, you will accumulate the fire element all the more in the room. As soon as you are free from the element yourself, you ought to feel how the element is amassing in the room, and get the sensation of the room becoming very warm. After some exercising, the warmth in the room will become a real matter of fact, and any person, magically trained or not, who enters the room is bound to feel the warmth. A thermometer will indicate how far we are capable of condensing our imagination with respect to the fire, so that a material, perceptible warmth can be produced in the room. The success of this exercise depends entirely on the willpower and the plastic, imaginative facility. It is not absolutely necessary in this step to bring about such an amount of physical warmth that it can be measured by a thermometer. But supposing the magician takes a keen interest in working in this particular way, he can specialize in this problem with the help of these instructions. The genuine magician, however, will not be satisfied with such an insignificant phenomenon, and rather prefers to further his own development because he is firmly convinced that he can obtain much more as time goes on. The exercise of the outward projection of the element is fullified as soon as the magician can distinctively feel the warmth in the room. Once he has got so far, he has to set free and pour out the accumulated fire element into infinity, into the universe again, where it dissolves spherically in all directions. Once it has been loaded with it, the magician can now leave the room any time he likes without dissolving the element. He can also confine the element to the room for any period of time, just as he did before with the impregnation of a room. All the success depends on his imagination and willpower. On the other hand, it is not advisable to leave a room filled with a certain element for a very long time, because beings belonging to the element in question like to do their pranks in such an atmosphere, usually at the cost of the master. You will find more about this in the chapter concerning the work with the element ghosts. Something different should be mentioned at this point. Supposing the magician does his exercise in the open air in unlimited space, he will have to apportion a certain space, no matter how big, for himself with the help of the imagination. There are no bounds for the imagination, neither here nor there. In the same way as the scholar did in his exercises with the fire element, he has to work with the other three elements after fire. He should take up the air, and after that the water, and finally earth. The termination of this exercise depends on the scholar's time and opportunities. He can deal with one element one day, with the next one the next day, and so on, or he can accumulate one element in the morning, the second at midday, the third in the evening, and the fourth element the next morning. Scholars who have plenty of time at their disposal and sufficient willpower can go through all four exercises by turns. These scholars will make enormous progress in mastering the elements. A scholar who controls all four elements in this direction may continue. The previous exercise has taught the magician how to accumulate the element inhaled through the solar plexus outward in space. In the following exercises, he will learn how to emit an accumulated element into space not only through the solar plexus, but through the whole body pore breathing, thus producing an accumulation of elements in space. This has to be practiced with all of the elements. The dissolving and scattering in the universe has to be performed in exactly the same manner as described in the previous exercise. As soon as the scholar masters this exercise as well, he will proceed to performing this exercise not only with the whole body, but with the parts of the body. Hands and fingers are usually engaged in magic, so the scholar ought to devote his full attention to them. He must accumulate the element by pore breathing in one hand or in both in such a manner that through a sheer motion of his hand, as if in a flash, he admits the element into the selected space, impregnating it instantly. Repeated practice makes perfect here as well. The scholar should practice this exercise on all the elements and master it, then he may continue. Sit in your customary position. Inhale the fire element through the lungs and pores of your whole body and accumulate it there until you get the sensation of heat. Now, imagine the accumulated fire element forming a fiery ball with a diameter of 4 to 8 inches in the solar plexus. This compressed ball must be so fiery and shining as to be very similar to the sun. Now imagine this all moving out of the solar plexus and floating free in the air. The sun ought to be imagined as a white hot and radiating heat. Stick to this imagery as long as you can. If you come near it with your hands, you ought to feel the heat radiating. Conclude this exercise by dissolving the ball slowly into the universe or by blowing it up by a sudden explosion into nothingness. Both methods should become familiar to you. You have to deal in the same way with the elements of air, water, and finally with the earth element. For the sake of a clear imagination, while dealing with the air element, give it a sky blue color while compressing it. The imagination of water will prove much easier for you. You have any difficulty with it. However, imagine it in the beginning as a spherical lump of ice. Think of the earth element as a lump of clay. When you have practiced this exercise with all the four element balls and have surely mastered it, turn to different shapes of the element according to the same method. At first, choose simple forms such as cubes, pyramids, cones, etc. The exercise is fullified as soon as you manage to condense any element you have accumulated in your body in any form and project it outward. Only in the previous exercise can be managed perfectly can the next one be taken up, which is dealing with the projection of elements directly from the universe. This practice is as follows. Sit in your asana position, breathing calmly and without any effort. Imagine that you are drawing the fire element from endless space, the universe, and with it, fill the room you are in. Imagine the universe in the shape of an enormous ball from which you are drawing the fire element in all directions to your room. Remember that the fire element, coming from the primary source, is the most etheric and subtle, and the more you pull it into you, the more dense material and hot it will become. You are bound to feel the heat on your body during this exercise. The more compressed and accumulated the element is condensed in the room, the stronger the heat will grow. You should actually have the sensation of being in a baking oven. Now dissolve the element into the infinite by your willpower and imagination. Repeat the same procedure for the air element, drawing it out of the ball-shaped universe down to you from all directions, filling and condensing your room with it. Performing this exercise correctly, you ought to have the sensation of floating in an endless ocean of air, free from any gravity and attractive power. In a room filled in just the described manner, you should feel as light as a balloon. Afterwards, you may dissolve the condensed air element again in its primary substance in exactly the same way you did with the fire element. Do likewise with the water element. Imagine you are drawing this element down to you out of an endless ocean. At first as sort of a cold vapor which you are condensing more and more the nearer you bring it to your body. Fill the whole exercise room with this cold vapor and imagine yourself in the center of this illusory water element. You must feel icy cold, and the moment you are feeling this cold, dissolve the water element again to its original form and let this stream away into nothingness. In this manner, the magician is able to cool and refresh his room in a few moments, even in the hottest summer days. Now try the same experiment with the earth element. Draw a gray mass similar to clay out of the universe. It is becoming browner and browner the nearer you bring it to yourself. Fill your room entirely with this heavy mass. By doing so, you ought to experience the heaviness and cohesiveness power, as well as its pressure on your body. Having gotten the earth element under your control, dissolve it again into its original material as you did with the other elements. By now, it is quite evident that the drawing down and materializing of the elements is happening exactly where we concentrated it with the element passing through the body. Everything is evidently occurring outside of your body. The magician is supposed to master both methods perfectly because in some magical task he will need an element which has been materialized through his body, for example in cases of healing sick people. On the other hand, he will need the direct, universally condensed element for creating subservient ghosts and elementals. Mastering this practice too, he is qualified to go ahead. The next exercise will be to draw an element out of the universe, not, however, to fill the space as described in the previous exercise, but condense a self-selected form, similar to the exercises where forms of the elements had been condensed in the solar plexus and kept outside the body. Floating in the air, the difference being that the formation of the shape does not take place inside the body, but immediately during its floating in the air. Consequently, the magician must know exactly how to produce a fireball, a ball of air, one of water, and an earth ball. If he has achieved this performance faultlessly, he has to shape different forms from the elements floating in the space and let these forms dissolve again in the universe after some time. All the time, he ought to feel the specific property of the element he is working with quite distinctly. He should be able to induce even a layman or ignorant people to see and feel the element in question. These are high achievements indeed, results of great effort in this line. In short, during the course of these exercises, the scholar should have learned to condense every element of the universe and understand how to compress it into any form he chooses. Magicians trained in this line can condense an element to such a degree that it becomes a material power. That is why you can light a fire with the help of the fire element at the greatest distance. At first, practice drawing a fiery ball down from the universe directly, without having it pass through the body, and compress it to a small bead, so as to grow to a glowing spark. Put the spark in a cotton ball that has been soaked in an easily flammable liquid such as ether, alcohol, or petrol. A second spark is to be prepared in the same way with the air element. From the very moment both sparks touch the cotton ball, it will catch fire and begin to burn. Having succeeded in this little trick, the magician can make an attempt with the wick of an ordinary candle, and later on with a paraffin lamp. He can do this near and far, apart from it. He can also confine a spark to a glass or a bottle, and filling a water spark into this container quick as a flash. As soon as those two sparks touch each other, both elements will explode and the glass or bottle will break into pieces. The magician can compose such artifices himself because he knows and masters the rules. The genuine magician will not waste his time with such dallying. He knows very well that he could produce as well as stop phenomena such as lightning, thunder, and rain by means of the elements. All these forces that strike the layman as wondrous manifestations go without saying for the magician, and it is entirely up to him whether he likes to specialize in a line of phenomenon or prefers to continue with his magical development. It is also a well-known fact to him that the Oriental fakirs accomplish the genuine mango tree miracle, growing from seed to fruit within an hour, only by mastering the elements. Besides, the learner has the possibility of controlling the material condensation of an element physically by throwing the condensed form of an element into a glass of clean, or even better, sterilized water, and repeating this action several times. With fire, the taste of water will appear sort of acidulous, with air sweetish, with water astringent, and with earth musty. This can be tested chemically by dipping a piece of litmus paper into the prepared water. If the water has been impregnated thoroughly, one will detect an acid reaction with the litmus paper when the active elements of fire and air are concerned, while the reaction will be alkaline in the case of water and earth. Who would not be reminded of the wedding at Cana where our Lord transformed water into wine? Only such a high adept as Jesus Christ could accomplish this miracle, not by influence of the element from the outside, but by mastering the Akasa principle of the water being transferred from the inside. At this point, I shall finish the mastering of the elements as far as the magical training of the soul in Step 5 is concerned. Nobody is expected to advance before he has worked thoroughly through all the tasks and exercises. The exercises are all going hand in hand, interdepending on each other. I take it for granted that it will not enter anyone's mind to stick to single exercises and methods only. The result would be fateful to the health of a person, and the success would never come. These facts have to be considered very carefully. He who does perform one exercise after the other surreptitiously can proceed with a clear conscience and can work on the magical development at full speed. Before describing the difficult exercises of the following step, I wish to point out again that the scholar is not allowed to hurry in his development. He ought to take sufficient time for this purpose if he wants to achieve a real success on the road to magic. He must absolutely be firm in all the exercises of the previous steps before turning to the following ones. Magic Mental Training 5. I shall describe here how to transplant your consciousness outwards. We must understand how to transplant our consciousness optionally into every object, animal and human being. Similar to the concentration on objects, put some objects which you are using every day in front of you. Sitting in your habitual position, fix your eyes for a short while on one of the objects and calculate the shape, color, and size of it firmly in your mind. Now imagine yourself being transmuted into this object. In a way, you must feel as the object itself and adapt all its properties. You have to be quite certain of the fact that you are fastened to the spot you have been put, unable to abandon it except through an outside influence. You should even be capable, by intense concentration, to regard your surroundings from the point of this object and to grasp its relationship to other objects. For example, supposing the object happens to be on the table, you feel the relationship to this table as well as to all the other things on the table, including the room in which the objects happen to be. Having managed this exercise with one object, you can gradually turn to the other things. This exercise is fulfilled if you have managed to connect each object you selected to your consciousness so that you have adapted the shape, size, and quality of the object, and that you remain in it for at least 5 minutes without any interruption. It must be possible for you to overlook and forget your body completely. Having managed this task, you can choose bigger objects like flowers, plants, shrubs, trees, etc. For your concentrative transmutation of consciousness. Consciousness knows neither time nor space. It is consequently an Akasa principle. Nobody should be deterred by the unusual kind of exercises and by the eventual failures at the beginning. Patience, perseverance, and tenacity will soon lead to the success aimed at. The scholar will learn later what significance these preliminary exercises have for the further magical work. As soon as one is able to manage transplanting consciousness into inanimate objects, the exercise with living objects will follow. It has been said before that consciousness is timeless and spaceless, and it is not necessary, while doing the exercises with living creatures, to have the object concerned directly before our eyes. By now, the scholar should be trained to as far as to be able to imagine any creature he likes. Let him therefore transplant his consciousness in the imagination of a cat, a dog, a horse, a cow, a goat, etc. The kind of experimental object does not matter. It might as well be an ant, a bird, or an elephant. At first, one begins with the imagination of the animal in the motionless condition. Later on, walking, running, creeping, flying, or swimming, corresponding to the kind of object in question. The scholar must be able to transmute his consciousness in any form he likes to, without interruption, if he wishes to regard this as being mastered. Adepts who have been practicing this exercise for years are able to understand any animal and handle it by their willpower. In connection with this fact, all we need is to remember the legend of the werewolves and other tales in which wizards transmuted themselves into animals. But fairy tales and legends have a far deeper significance to the magician. There is no doubt that these are cases of the so-called black magicians, who adapt all sorts of animal shapes in the invisible world, not to be recognized whole during their wicked work. The good magician will always condemn such actions, and his spiritual facilities allow him to see through such creatures and to recognize the real figure or the artificer. Our preliminary exercises do not serve to induce the scholar to wicked deeds, but to prepare him for the higher magic. Well, he will have to adapt higher divine forms into which he will transplant his self-consciousness. If one has been trained during the exercise to the point of being capable of adapting any kind of animal shape with the consciousness, and if one can manage to maintain this imagination for 5 minutes without interruption, then the same exercise has to be practiced on human beings. For the beginning, select acquaintances, friends, members of the family, whose imagination you are able to keep in mind, without discrimination of sex and age. One always has to be very sure about how to transplant the consciousness into the body so that one feels and thinks oneself as being the imaginary person. From well-known people, one may turn to strangers never seen before, and therefore to be imagined. Finally, you may choose people of different races as experimental subjects. The exercise is ended if you manage to transplant your consciousness for at least 5 minutes into one of the imaginary bodies. The longer the spell of this achievement, the more profitable it will become. This particular exercise gives the magician the power to connect himself with every human being, not only to know the ideas and feelings developing in the imaginary person, his past and his present, his way of thinking and acting, but even to influence him according to his own liking, but still with the proverb in mind: what a man sows, he shall reap. So the magician will never use his influences for anything bad or force people to act against their own will. He will use the great power over every human being given him through these exercises for the good only, and the blessing will never fail. The magician will learn from these facts why the Oriental scholar bestows the highest worship to his master. By worshipping the master, he connects himself instinctively with the master's consciousness, and so being influenced indirectly, his progress will be far more certain and faster as well. It is quite obvious that the Oriental training methods regard a master or guru as absolutely necessary for the development of the scholar. The well-known Tibetan Angkor is based on the same fundament. But in this inverted order, the master connects himself with the scholar's consciousness and transplants the power and enlightenment to him. The same thing happens in the case of the mystics, the point in question being the phenomenon transfer. Magic Psychic Training 5. In this chapter, we shall amplify the work with the concerning the elements. We have learned to take in the element by breathing through the lungs and pores, and to perceive its specific qualities in our whole body. Now we shall charge single parts of the body with any element we like, which can be executed in two different ways. The magician should manage both methods. The first one is as follows. In the same way as described in step 3, through inhaling with the lungs and the pores, you are breathing the element into the whole body and accumulating it there. That means you are breathing out thoroughly without any imagination at all. While inhaling, connect your imagination of feelings with the specific quality of the element. Fire forming the idea of heat, water that of cold, air of lightness, and the earth of gravity. You have to begin with the inhaling 7 times. Instead of dissolving the accumulated element, giving it back to the universe through imagination, lead it to that part of the body you choose. By compressing the specific quality of the element and feel the concerned part of the body with it, you should feel the compressed element with its specific quality much stronger in the single part of the body than in the whole body. Similar to steam producing a higher pressure when being compressed, the flesh, bones, and the skin of the single part of the body have to be penetrated with the element. Consequently, if you are feeling the specific quality of the element enormously strong in the loaded part of the body, let it be dissolved with the help of your imagination throughout the whole body and by breathing out as described in step 3. Let it stream forth and back into the universe. This exercise is to be done with each of the elements. Alternatively, with every external and internal organ, with the exception of the brain and the heart. To avoid damage, do not ever accumulate any element in these 2 organs at all, neither in your own case nor in the case of other people. Only a master who is perfectly experienced in managing elements may allow himself a certain accumulation in the heart and brain without ruining himself. He knows his body and has got it well in hand. Every organ, the heart and brain as well, are suited for the supply of elements with their specific qualities. But of course, without any accumulation, the beginner should always avoid the accumulation of elements or vital power in the heart or brain, especially if he is not yet able to observe the functions of the difficult organs with the help of clairvoyance. By performing an accumulation of elements or vital power in the whole body, the brain and the heart are getting used to the general accumulation, because in the case the tension is not related to one organ only, but is expanding over the whole body. It is very important indeed to manage the accumulation of elements and vital power in the hands and feet very well, because this will be of manifold use in the practical application of magic. The keenest attention should be paid to the fingers. A further possibility of withdrawing an element from an organ of the body is not to lead the accumulated element back into the body and deliver it through pore breathing to the universe, but with the help of imagination to return the whole element through the pores at once from the organ back to the universe. This process is quicker. A magician naturally must be capable of managing both methods and must understand how to handle them quite at will. The second method of element accumulation in any part of the body is to transfer one's own personality with the consciousness into one part of the body and to allow it, similarly to breathing through the pores, to inhale in and to breathe out. The element that is inhaled with every breath stays there while you are breathing thoroughly. As soon as you are feeling that a sufficient amount of the element has been accumulated in the inhaling part of the body, set it free again while you are breathing out. Give it to the universe from where you have drawn it. The process is quiet, simple, and quick, but it requires a perfect transplantation of the consciousness. On the other hand, the accumulation of vital power in a certain part of the body has to be managed very skillfully indeed. When perfectly acquainted with this practice, you can proceed to a further step. We all know that the human body is divided in 4 principal regions, corresponding to the elements. For the sake of a better understanding, we shall repeat it. The feet up to the thighs, rump bone including the genitals, corresponding to the earth. The abdominal region, with the internal organs such as the bowels, milt, gall, liver, stomach, to the midriff, corresponds to the water element. The chest, the lungs, and the heart to the neck correspond to the air element, and the head with all its organs to the fire element. The task of the next exercise is to load the different regions of the body with the corresponding element. The practice is as follows. Take up your favorite position. By breathing through the lungs and pores, inhale the earth element with its specific property of gravity into the earth region of the body. From the feet along the genitals to the rump bone. Inhale the earth element 7 times and breathe out thoroughly, thus filling the earth region with the element influencing it. Keep the earth element in the earth region and inhale the water element 7 times into the water region, that is, the abdomen, without breathing it out, so that this region remains equally filled with its own element. Then turn to the next element and fill the chest with the air element 7 times, leaving this element in its own region without breathing it out. Now it is the turn of the head region, which you will fill by inhaling the fire element 7 times. Exhale the empty breath, and the head region will also remain filled with the fire element. All the regions being loaded with the corresponding elements remain in this position about 2 to 5 minutes and then begin with the dissolving of the elements. One begins where one finished, from the head with the fire element by inhaling 7 times and breathing out the fire element 7 times into the universe. The head region being disengaged from the element, the next region we have to look at, that is of the air, and after that region of the water, and finally that of the earth, until the whole body is free from the accumulation of the elements. If you achieved a certain skill in this practice, you may extend it, but not only filling the different body regions with the elements, but by accumulating the elements in these regions. The process is the same as just described, that is, you begin and again with the earth element and finished with the fire element. The procedure of dissolving is equal to the one of the previous experiments. These exercises are of great importance because they establish the harmony between the material as well as the astral body and the universal rule of the elements. If the magician should ever get into disharmonies through any peculiar circumstances, all he has to do is practice these exercises and he will immediately redress the harmony. He will experience the comforting influence of the entire universal harmony, not only for a few hours but for a few days, which is creating and keeping in him the feeling of peace and happiness. The harmony of the elements in the body offers more advantages, of which I shall mention only a few. First of all, the scholar is protected against the pernicious influence of the negative side of the elements. The very moment the scholar has achieved the magical equipoise, he is standing in the center of all events, and will be aware of all the laws, all the constitutive moments and processes taking place in the universe in the true perspective. The scholar is spared from many illnesses, producing an effect of balance on his own karma and thus on his fate. He becomes more resistant against any dangerous influence. He is cleaning his mental and astral aura, strengthening his mental and astral matrix. He is reviving his magical facilities, and his institution will become of universal character. His astral senses will be refined, and his intellectual capacities will rise. Magical physical training. The exercises of the first step should have become a habit by now. Those of the second step have to be enforced and deepened according to time and opportunity. One ought to have the capacity of sticking firmly to any asceticism one has imposed upon oneself without having to fight temptations or even to succumb to any of them. The exercises of the third step are to be deepened as well. One has to manage the position of the body so far as to endure the asana seat for hours without feeling the slightest disturbance, nervousness, tension, or convulsion. The power of radiation has to be enforced, deepened, and must become more expansive, meaning more dynamic, which has to be accomplished by imagination and deep meditation. The magician has to learn the practical use of the radiant power for any purpose and in any situation. He must reach such a degree of perfection that any desire that he is transplanting into the radiant power is realized instantly. In this manner, he will be able to help suffering people in cases of illness and accident, and thus bring great blessings to himself. Now we shall go on to a further chapter. Also unknowns to date. Concerning positions of the body, gestures, and positions of the fingers, generally known as ritual. The fundamental principle of rituals is based on confirming an idea, a train of thoughts by an external mode of an expression, or the other way around. Producing a train of thought by a gesture or action, which we shall disintegrate evocation in Hermetics. This maxim is standing for the entire magical ritual. It is stated hereby that not only any idea can be expressed by an action, but can also be bound to a certain task. This refers to any creature as well. Anything not receiving and bearing a special name, symbol, or external mark is without significance. All the magical processes and rituals are based on this primordial thesis in every religious system with its special cults since the remotest times. The only difference is that nothing but a very small part has been accessible to the masses, while most of it has been kept strictly secret but reserved only to high priests and adepts. Every ritual answers a certain purpose, regardless whether the point in question be the banning of witchcraft, of Tibet, or the gestures of fingers, mudras, performed by the Bali priests in their cults in the Orient, or in the exorcism ritual of the magicians. The synthesis will always remain the same. At a trial, the hand with 3 fingers raised for the oath as confirmation of a truthful statement may also be regarded as a magical gesture. From the Christian point of view, the raised fingers symbolize the Trinity. Each of the numerous lodges and sects has its own rites. The lodges of the Freemasons, for example, are all bound to a fixed sign, word, and touch. A lot could be said about this problem from the historical point of view. For practical magic respecting the magical training, however, studies like these would be absolutely useless. It is of no importance at all to the genuine magician if he reads books about the particular way in which any other magician is drawing his magic circle, regarding it as a symbol of infinity, divinity, and purity, planting his genii and angels in it for the sake of protection, or else how a lama is painting his mandala and sets up his Thargatas as a symbol of protective deity. He does not need such strange directions because he knows very well that they are only a mental support for the mind. In this fourth step, the magician will learn how to produce his own rituals, gestures, and manipulations of the fingers. All this depends a great deal on his individuality and perception. Many a magician has achieved more with the most primitive rituals than a philosophic speculator with all his complicated performances of his cult. It is not possible to give an exact direction in this matter, and the scholar will have to act intuitively and must understand how to express the ideas, trains of thought, and everything he would like to be realized by a suitable gesture, position of the fingers, or by a ritual. He will certainly not try to express a blessing gesture by a clenched fist ready to attack. He will compose his individual, unceremonious ritual according to his situation and position that he is using when no one is watching him. There are magicians who are performing rituals unnoticed in the middle of a big crowd by movements of their fingers in the pockets of their coats. In conformity with the elements, they are using the analogy of the 5 fingers by imputing the forefinger to fire, the thumb to water, and the middle to akasa, the ring finger to earth, and the little finger to air. The right hand represents the positive elements, and the left the negative elements. This small example may be sufficient. Learn to give quite individual signs to different ideas, but keep silent about them, because if anyone else should use the same size for the same idea, he would weaken it by the derivation of its strength. Bind and fix your personal desire, that which you most eagerly to be realized, to your own small ritual or gesticulation, best of all gesticulations of the fingers, and imagine that you desire is being realized by this gesture, or that has been realized already. The rule of the present imperative formula is valid here as well. The imaginary realization in connection with the gesture or rite has to be performed at the beginning with the feeling of assurance, self-confidence, and self-reliance, and with unshakable faith in success. At first, the ritual as well as the imagination have to be used. Later on, dealing only with the imagination of the desire and its realization, you will be induced, without even noticing it, automatically to use the gesture or the ritual. Having arrived at this point, that a desire has become an automatic function of your imagination, the process will go on in an inverted order. You perform the ritual or gesture, and the imagination or the power in question will automatically release their effect. This is the real purpose of the ritual. The position or the gesture of the limbs and the fingers as soon as the ritual has become self-acting with the imagination. It will be sufficient to perform the ritual only to achieve the effect or influence you have been wishing for. A comparison very near to the point is offered by a fully charged battery that needs nothing but the correct contact to produce the current at any time. By repeating the imagination with the selected gesture or ritual, a power reserve is formed in the causal sphere of the Akasa principle, which will adopt the necessary vibration. Color, sound, and all the analogies corresponding to the desire or purpose. We can rightly assert that they are blood particles of the entire condition. If this power reservoir has been loaded by frequent repetition, the mere ritual will produce the discharge of one part of this reservoir, bringing about the necessary effect in this way. It is therefore profitable not to talk about it, otherwise somebody else could easily draw up the power by the same ritual and accomplish the effect, naturally at the sacrifice of the originator. Certain lodges let their beginners perform rituals by which such a power reservoir is loaded automatically. In this case, the higher adepts would get a cheap additional allowance and could work with it effortlessly. But as soon as the scholar is making progress and is capable of attaining it by himself, he will be advised to use this ritual as little as possible. Evidently, some people will come to the conclusion that several of the political movements or parties are performing an indirect magical action with the gesture of a salute, and in this manner supply the general reservoir with more. However small parts of the vital power, by constant repetition, we shall remember the salute of the German NSDAP, consisting in a lifting of the hand and certainly representing a certain gesture of power. But if such an increased collective power reservoir is used for greedy and questionable purposes, this mentally strained power is turning against the founders because of its polarity, and decay and destruction will follow. Apart from the fact that the curses of the absolutely innocent victims pinning in prisons, sentenced to death, or sent to hopeless battles in the field, will invisibly produce an opposite polarity that will also contribute to the decomposition of the first reservoir. The same law works in all the rest of cult practices, no matter whether they happen in religions, sects, or lodges. The miraculous healings and places of pilgrimage have the same fundamental base. The devoted believer is drawing up the spiritual power from the Akasa principle, accumulated there by the worshippers as a result of their firm faith and unshakable confidence, and the miraculous effect is carried out in this manner. The well-trained magician will always find the sole true explanation for such and similar phenomenon by this knowledge of the universal laws. Using his knowledge of polarity laws, he could without any doubt grasp all the power from the cult reservoir by the force and produce healings or other astonishable miracles at any time if he wanted to. On a high ethical level, the magician would regard such deeds as a sort of theft, and therefore will always refuse to lower himself to do it, because he has so many other possibilities at hand. This shall be mentioned only by the way, and we shall turn back again to the rituals. It has been said before that any idea, every desire, and every imagination can be realized by a ritual, no matter which of the planes, material, astral, or mental, be concerned. Only the time of realization depends on the mental maturity and the diligence of using the rituals. The magician will choose such best rituals of a universal character that he can use for a lifetime. The fewer desires he has, all the sooner he can book the success. Supposing the rituals he chooses do not function effectively enough at first, he should not subjoin with others. In the beginning, he ought to be satisfied with one or at most 3 rituals. Having arrived at this step of development, the magician will understand perfectly to check on the right measure, and he will also know how much he is able to load. Summary of exercises of Step 5. 1. Magic mental training. Transplantation of consciousness into objects, into animals, and into human beings. 2. Magic psychic training. Accumulation of elements in the whole body in single parts of the body with the help of 2 methods. Production of element harmony in the appropriate regions of the body. Fire is head, air is chest, water is abdomen, earth is rump bone, genitals, and feet. Magic physical training. 3. Rituals and their practical applicability, gesticulations, bearings, and postures of the fingers.